Welcome back to Revolutionary Roulette. I'm Rob Zielinski. You can find me on Twitter at Rob Zielinski. That's Zielinski. You can follow the show on Instagram at Revolutionary Roulette or email the show at revolutionaryroulette@gmail.com. And I'm joined, as always, by my co-host, Mr. Joshua Catlow.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. You can find me on the socials at Joshua Patrick for Facebook and Instagram. And you can find me on Twitter, mourning the loss of another historical Black figure and arguing about his greatness at Joshua Catlow.
Yeah, like you said, we really might if we lose somebody else, like if we lose like Dr. Cornel West or anybody like that, we're gonna have to
consider maybe putting the kibosh on this or renaming it or something.
Yeah, because we've lost Paul Mooney, DMX,
Humpty Hump. I can't think of his name. His legit name, but there was a couple more too, and it's a shame that we're not remembering at the moment. But that's what happens when everything becomes a blur from week to week. But I digress.
So we're gonna start part 1 of chapter 5, A Kind of Revolution. Again, this is Howard Zinn's. I almost said Howard Stern's. Like, what the fuck?
He'd write a good historical fiction or a historical book, I bet.
So Howard Zinn's A People's History of the United States. So
and then they showed up in the studio. Sorry.
As we're now all aware, the Americans beat the British Army in the American Revolution. Somehow, the revolutionary leadership convinced poor whites who owned guns to fight with them on their behalf. Because, of course, neither the black slaves nor any Native Americans were going to fight on their side. So the idea of the American Revolution was not a popular one. Most of the white population did go into the service, but a fraction of the people actually stayed in the fight. And John Fuckhead Adams, who we alluded to last week, estimated that support for the war was broken down by thirds of the population, meaning a third was in support of the revolution, a third opposed, and a third just meh.
So 2/3 were kind of iffy on what was going on, and it's pretty simple. As our guy last week, Thomas Kraft, said, tyranny is tyranny, let it come from who it may. That's essentially the thought process of what was going on in the early parts of the Revolutionary War. It's like, okay, so if the British are screwing us over, or the American colonists win and they become our dictators, what's the difference? Our poverty level is not changing.
Right.
There's a phrase in therapy, nothing changes if nothing changes, to help you kind of move your way through things. And that's exactly what we have going on in the early cases of the Revolutionary War. Nothing changes if nothing changes. They're having a hard time convincing whites, armed whites, which they need. Yes, for once in your life, 2A gun nuts, you can celebrate, slap hands, do high fives, whatever the fuck you feel like. But you were needed to win the Revolutionary War because of pure numbers. You had arms and you knew how to use them. And besides, they didn't want blacks, Indians, or indentured servants fighting for them, which they abruptly change later on in our story.
That's right. So before we get there, Alexander Hamilton, who was George Washington, Gopher Boy, motherfucking Gopher Boy,
no longer the man again.
So he wrote, quote, "Our countrymen have all of the folly of the ass and all of the passiveness of the sheep. They are determined not to be free. If we are saved, France and Spain must save us. And he was certainly right about the last part, because France definitely saved their bacon by coming to their aid at the end.
And
but just straight up shitting on everybody else. Like, oh, you
Alexander Hamilton is what made him. The more you learn about the American history, the more you're going to dislike the musical Hamilton, what both you and I loved so much that we shared the experience together. But as you learn more, he was a cocky son of a bitch. And I think that's one of the reasons why Washington kind of took him under his wing, and his way of spitting on his own people, or putting them down at the very least, was, I think, an attempt to rile them up, but also a way of showing that I'm better than you and I know.
Yeah, it is, like you said, it's super hard to.
It's very difficult. He's an ass.
I mean, I got that part about, like, you even get that from the Broadway show, right? He was an ass, and he was pompous. He was, he was just a conceited jerk. He even, cheated on his wife. You're like, wow, what a piece of shit. And, it turns out he's a piece of shit for so many other different reasons.
Let me on top of that.
So, yeah, and exactly. Yeah. He was like, married to Eliza, and then was longing for the sister, and the sister was like all into it until anyway. Yeah. It comes down to, he's a piece of shit. He's not as great a person as it seems in the actual Broadway show. So,
in defense of Alexander Hamilton, you find that out about just about every historical figure, which I've mentioned every single episode of this podcast. So not just him, but everybody, essentially, when you look deep into their souls and their past, not the greatest of folks.
That's right. So the South wasn't all that helpful in the Revolutionary War, because they were using their militias to hold off slave uprisings, especially in states like South Carolina. So the colonial militia at first was made up of men described by historian John Shai as, quote, hallmarks for respectability, or at least of full citizenship.
Aristocratic jerks.
Yeah. And I couldn't help but to like read that into like hallmarks of respectability, or at least of full citizenship. Good day, sir. Yeah, with the pipe.
So yeah, Captain Bottomtooth the Third here.
And that's because that's what these fucking Strokes wanted, was this sort of merry band of gentlemen in the fight. But also, like we alluded to before, who the fuck else was there? Like, you think free black people were going to fight, or white servants, or whites who lived on the streets were going to volunteer to fight?
They all acted like Stevie Wonder and Ray Charles, like, fight for what? What are you doing for me?
And so the operative word there is volunteer to fight for so-called freedom from Great Britain. So, but these stogie smoking, fucking brandy sniffing whites did, like you mentioned a bit earlier, get desperate for soldiers and decided to try to recruit less respectable whites.
Vagrants is what they end up getting called later in the chapter. Servants or people of the street, vagrants, whatever. And they needed as many people in mass quantities as they could come across, because your merry band of misfits, in which you spoke of earlier, didn't have the sack enough to actually go through with the war on their own and produce the outcome in which they desired. So
right. And again, I'm not sure if this was like, it seemed like it was 100% completely planned out, but I'm not sure. It could have just been this sort of organic, this is what happens in capitalism. We just shit on the poor people and go send them to fight our wars. So yeah, so like you mentioned, Virginia and Massachusetts started providing for drafts, which were known as, you said, vagrants. They were known as strollers back in the day. So into the militia, and quote, in fact, the military became a place of promise for the poor who might rise in rank, acquire some money, change their social status. Here was the traditional device by which those in charge of any social order mobilize and discipline a recalcitrant population, offering the adventure and rewards of military service to get poor people to fight for a cause they may not see clearly as their own.
Why wouldn't they see it clearly as their own? They've only been told from day one of stepping foot on this land that they were subhuman. But now that we need you, we need you.
Fight. We need you, baby. Need you to step up.
Exactly. Put the boots on. Let's go. But
again, this shit sounds real fucking familiar, right? Like,
yeah, it's the same thing we've been preaching for quite a few weeks now. And this part of our conversation I knew was coming, and I had a fight inside of me on whether to speak my mind or just bite my tongue. And usually I speak my mind. And I'm going to again.
Good.
So when you just read that the population, they were trying to get a bunch of drafted individuals, or excuse me, they were trying to draft a bunch of individuals to join the army, join their forces, so they could try and win a battle or two in this Revolutionary War, because as we will find out later, it did not start off so swimmingly for the American side. But they were trying to convince middle-class people to join that, which middle-class people eventually had the way out where they could buy their freedom from having to go to war for a certain amount of money, and then somebody else would get suckered into it. The statement in which I'm going to say that is argumentative and maybe insulting is that people that join the military, in a vast majority of cases, aren't the most educated and do it because they see it as one of the few ways of life in which they can have promise of betterment. And maybe some go because of the free schooling that's promised, not in American Revolutionary times, but I'm talking about comparisons from now to back in 1774. Right. So I guess what I'm trying to say is they were trying to pull the wool over the eyes of people who already had plenty of wool over their eye.
Yeah. So I think you might be mostly right. The only thing I might push back against is like the lack of education part, because it's true. Maybe, a lot of these people who join up for the military don't have the best education, but people that I know, who did go into the service had, at least a high school diploma.
Okay.
A lot had college degrees or associate's degrees. Some people, especially when we talk about Black Americans, because of where they live, even with the education, but because of the lack of resources and because they are Black or their name sounds Black, they get passed over for the jobs. And then they feel like, well, this isn't working. Now my last resort option is joining the military. I'm going to get paid and I could possibly rise above my station.
The people in which I knew had high school educations and graduated. However, that's not something that these folks that I'm speaking of should be able to hang their hats on. I appreciate the service to our country, obviously. I'm not
Yeah.
trying to downplay what you did for our country because without your service, we wouldn't be where we are today in some cases, in a lot of cases. But what I am saying is they saw that as one of the only options versus how am I going to get a respectable job with my type of knowledge. And once again, it's not a disrespectful statement. I think if we were to look statistically at the matter, which maybe we can pull up for next week's show, I bet you it would show that most people that join the military outside of the Naval Academy and things like that are come from lack of educated backgrounds. We'll look that up to see what it says, but once again, I digress. We got to move on.
You just gave yourself some more homework there, buddy.
I appreciate it. Yeah, I know you got your hands full.
So, again, all this stuff sounds familiar. The shit is still happening today. It was the poor that fought and suffered between 1775 and 1783. It's a story as old as time. And it just reminds me of that System of a Down lyric. Why do they always send the poor? They always send the poor. They always send the poor.
Why do they always send the poor? Yes.
So I wanted to take a moment to possibly discuss this passage from Zinn. Quote, ruling elites seem to have learned through the generations, consciously or not, that war makes them more secure against internal trouble. So again, shit isn't good at home. Let's start a war. It brings about these nationalist feelings. We need to, circle the wagons and go after whomever. We need to go after these ISIL extremists, or we need to go after these Nazis. Shit's not good. Let's, start a war or jump in a war. The Nazis probably not the best example because what else were we supposed to do? Like, yeah, you have to fucking go to war against the fascists in that case. But, just going to starting wars in Iraq, Afghanistan, shit like that. It happens way more than it should. All these, starting wars, and then they're turned into forever wars because we're still fucking there.
They got pull-out game like Antonio Cromartie, and he's got 22 kids. So.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think 9/11 is going to turn 20 years old.
And we still have troops there. But we're looking for weapons of mass destruction, which we know the outcome of that. And then we're supposed to be keeping the civilians safe, which my ass. But
so yeah, I didn't give the best examples. Maybe I could have given better examples, but this shit has been happening for centuries. And obviously it goes further back than American Revolutionary War. This stuff goes back to fucking probably Ottoman Empire shit. But I just want everyone out there to keep this sort of thing in mind, because we have Biden is saying we're going to pull out troops from Afghanistan. I want to say in like September or something. And yeah, that might happen. And that's good. Come home then and stay home. Not let's send more to Asia or in that region because we're going to have another Cold War, this time with China. So
it's always somebody. We can't just keep to ourselves. And the reasoning behind that is because of imports, exports, oil, and
Well, I think most of it has to do with arms sales, right? Just
arms
like
sales, and we were speaking of last week helicopter sales, which I guess could be classified as
right,
arms sales.
right, yeah,
But when you have large contracts for both, I mean, it's
yeah.
what are you going to do? I mean,
Congratulations to General Dynamics and Boeing and Raytheon. Like you're just literally fucking killing it.
They've been essentially printing money on demand, and then still making a killing, pun intended, off of these arms contracts. But they can't seem to get anything right in the way of taxation, poverty, education, or homelessness.
Oh, in their eyes, they're getting it right.
But
right?
why would they want to get it right?
Right. That's what
because we're not doing enough. And once again, this is a historic podcast, but in this day and age, we're not doing enough to make our voices heard. So they have to listen. They have to listen.
Right.
We'll probably ramble about that for a few minutes at the end of the show. But I wanted to read something real quick. This is about somebody who was trying to get convinced into joining the American Revolution for the Americans. I was a shoemaker. I got my living by labor. When the rebellion came on, I saw of my neighbors got into commission who were no better than myself. I was very ambitious, did not like to see other men above me. I was asked to enlist as a private soldier. I offered to enlist upon having a lieutenant's commission, which was granted. I imagined myself now in a way of promotion. If I was killed in battle, there would be an end of me. But if my captain was killed, I should rise in rank and still could have a chance to rise even higher. These, sir, were the only motives of my entering into the service. So he had zero hope whatsoever going on in his life, to where he decided that as a shoemaker to join the war and at a lieutenant's commission, but with the hopes that people in front of him would perish so he can rise up the ladder and actually make a living. Colonel pay at that time was $75 per month, where private pay at that time, I don't know if this is coincidentally or if they were just laughing in their chambers at it, but it was $6.66. So,
wow. Brutal.
Colonels were actually being able to establish themselves while the peons were once again being peed on. So, just found that interesting.
Yeah, no, there's so many anecdotes like that in the book. So that's why we encourage people to actually read the entire book, because you're missing out on some individual stories like this that are fascinating, but certainly put all this stuff into perspective and context, especially because we keep tying it into politics and topics of today. But it's fucking seamless. Centuries, years later, it's seamless.
It's like a puzzle piece. And for those of you wondering, can you let Rob please read the passages? That's why we usually do, because I was reading like the kid out of Happy Gilmore. Today, Junior.
So in Connecticut, if you were...
my vision.
Yeah, me too. I wear the contacts. If you were a male between the ages of 16 and 60, you were forced into military service. Again, there was the volunteer earlier. Now you're being forced. Unless, of course, you're black or mixed or Indian or a student or staff at Yale University or a government official or a fucking minister. And I'd be like, you know what? Call me fucking Deacon Rob or Pastor Rob or Father Rob, because God is good and I ain't fighting in this fucking war for the elites.
Right. Some interesting facts about Yale. Eli Yale was worked for the same company in which the 342 chests of tea were thrown into the Boston Harbor during the Boston Tea Party by the Sons of Liberty.
Wow,
I thought
okay.
that was an interesting fact and
Yeah.
tie-in. I'm drawing a blank on the name of the company because I didn't write it down like an ass, but
The British East India Company.
that's it. Described as a merchant and a philanthropist by the Encyclopedia Britannica, the Yale headmaster had two paintings on his wall in which he thought were just cute as the Dickens, where he had young little black kids standing next to him in portraits of himself. However, these young little African American boys had collars on, like you would put on dogs, or if you're Mike Tyson, you would put on tigers. So,
oh my gosh.
Eventually, and not so long ago, were they forced to take those pictures down. In the grand scheme of thing, it wasn't so long ago. I'm not talking about like weeks or anything, but
yeah, no, that's right. I mean, that reminds me of I want to say it was either vice versa, but I want to say Henry Ford had a picture of Adolf Hitler in his office, hung up in his office.
The people that use the fact like Adolf Hitler was such a great leader, he was just crazy. What the fuck are you talking about? Like,
you know,
people don't understand that some things aren't worth the lives of humanity or money, or the same conversations we had with Donald Trump. Like, is it worth selling your soul to vote for him? We're not fans of Joe Biden either. However, when you have to choose between the lesser of two evils, you choose between the guy that isn't going to start a race war that's already essentially begun on its own and divides us even further. So, yes, I'm not ecstatic about the way that President Biden has gone about his first 130 days in office. However, it could be a lot worse, in my opinion. I know you can weigh in on that, but to get back to the book, whatever you so choose. But
it could be, but like, obviously not a Trump supporter, but lesser of two evils is still fucking evil. So that's, there's still evil shit going on, like full-throatedly backing Bibi Netanyahu and Israel as they fucking pound the Gaza Strip with bombs and are just annihilating Palestinians and killed like 60 children in 11 days, north of 250 people total. So,
and refuses to step in. And I heard the first steps are going to be a stern request that the fighting, a ceasefire is agreed to. Get the fuck out of there. We give them the money. Go in and stop it.
Yeah. There's so much to it. It's very convoluted. So
it is. Maybe we'll do a Patreon episode about Gaza Strip.
That's right. So again, like you mentioned before, you could get out of the military service if you paid a fee of £5. It was yet another poor tax. And if you can't pay it, you're going to war or you're going to jail, straight to jail.
Poor tax. I got 7 tickets in the mail the other day.
What?
For driving 71 miles in
a 65?
No. I would have lost my shit if that was the case. I believe it was a 55. However, he said it was a construction zone, in which it was not. And he also said that he wasn't going to write me a ticket. But as he walked back to his statey vehicle, he said, expect to see something in the mail. And I shout out, I'm like, what do you mean expect to see something in the mail? And he did not turn around. So, but I could tell you a little bit more about that after
Yes, please. And you just froze
high
up.
five.
Okay, there you go. There you are. So 18 men didn't show up for the service and they were sent to jail. And the only way they could be released is if they pledged to fight in the Revolutionary War. Again, this wasn't a popular war, so they were forcing poor people into the military service. And then once they're there, it's easier to convince them that this war is a national cause and good for everyone in the country. Seems easier when you can throw the poor into the trenches and while they're being shelled with cannon, be like, see, they hate you. They want to kill you because you're American.
I'm going to be 100% honest. My computer froze up and I did not hear any of the last 2 minutes of you speaking. I apologize. So I can't rebuttal.
Don't worry about it. So here's a super quick Revolutionary War recap, just because I think these things are fun to know and again give historical context. So the Americans lost the first few battles of the war, which included the Battle of Bunker Hill, Harlem Heights, Brooklyn Heights, and the Deep South. They
Chicago Heights and Arlington Heights.
I know that's what it made me think of too. Bridgeport Heights. They won a few small battles at Princeton and Trenton and won a big turning point battle at Saratoga, New York. And when I hear Saratoga, I just think of the racetrack up there. Anyway, Washington's army held on at Valley Forge, Pennsylvania, while Benjamin Franklin was brokering an alliance with King Louis in France, and the French were into it because they wanted revenge against the English. So
and
now
the French are into everything.
Right, yeah. So
literally
the French tickler. So now the war headed to the South, and the British were kicking so much American ass. But the French army came in like the fucking cavalry to save the day. So they brought a huge army to aid the Americans on the ground and the French Navy to set up a blockade so no more British reinforcements or supplies could play a part in the war. And the French and Americans won the Battle of Yorktown, which was the final victory over England and sent them fucking packing.
Are you happy, Alexander Hamilton? You called it. You got it right. The peasants, the ass of the jack, didn't do anything.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, you know, I don't know if it was like a poignant observation or you know, and just said in a very dickish way, or you know, he's just a straight up dick. And you know, you would think a guy who like came from the poor in Puerto Rico would like have some empathy for his poor brothers, but
humility,
yeah.
like just understand people's plight that they've had to deal with in their life. But that doesn't seem to be the case in any particular individual that we meet throughout the course of history thus far.
That's right. So, but all along, rich versus poor conflicts that were mostly suppressed during the war, they did still keep popping up. So militias made of poor and middling people threatened violence against elites because they were opposing price controls, and shitheads like Robert Morris was holding food from the market to make the prices skyrocket. I mean, people got to eat, so they got to pay these ridiculous prices. And it's either that, pay those prices, or organize and appropriate the stores for themselves without leaving money at the cash register or whatever the fuck it was back then, greenbacks or gold or whatever the fuck.
Right. They had paper money and they paid in gold, and there was coinage of some sort as well. But
coinage.
I think the most interesting thing to me about the how the battle started off and how the battles ended was Bunker Hill and Brooklyn Heights. They ran out of ammunition. They were in both battles. They were able to stave off British attacks for the first 2 or 3 opportunities, but they were so ill prepared that they ran out of ammunition, which is what caused them to retreat from Bunker Hill in the Boston area, and then obviously Brooklyn Heights. It used to be the war was fought on Long Island, or at least what used to be known as Long Island, now referred to as Brooklyn. But the same thing happened in that instance too. They ran out of ammunition and weren't able to hold their ground, and hence Brooklyn was taken over by somebody besides the Beastie Boys. So,
so the pretty good segue here. The Continental Congress, which was the body that governed the colonies during the war, was made up of mostly, you guessed it, rich white men who were all connected together like one giant goddamn incestuous aristocrats joke. So fucking it's just all so disgusting. So and it just reminds me of that meme of Charlie Day standing in front of the corkboard full of pictures with a spider web of red yarn connecting everything together, and you know the class war marches on.
Yes.
So Robert Morris,
Richmond, Virginia.
And I can't believe this fucking guy had his own college in downtown Chicago, and it's actually still alive and well today, as it merged with Roosevelt University last year. But yeah, that Robert Morris wanted to take care of those who had money to loan to the Continental Congress to gain support of officers who stuck through the war to the end. And to vote for half pay for life, which just completely fucking ignored the rank and file soldiers.
Once again, when you're trying to come up, and they join the army for one specific reason and one specific reason only, to try and change their future, and then to once again get shit on towards the end of battle, when you're thinking that maybe there could be some kind of reward for your efforts, kind of like going to work every day. If I put in that extra effort on my TPS report, I don't see another dime.
That's right. And so where I was going with the Continental Congress thing was, they were, like you said, they were fighting well in those battles, ran out of ammo or whatever. And again, to refer back to the Hamilton Broadway, there's the line is we're dealing with a third of what Congress promised us. So they asked for more shit. They're like, if you give us this, we could win this war, a lot more easily. And they're like, yeah, but that just like that costs so much more money, and I like my money. And so yeah, they're just like the elites always tone this line of, I need to keep as much money as I can, but I need to spend a little to make a little, but like that too much though, because
in this case it's essentially good versus evil, because you're choosing your money over the lives of your own people or the lives of your own people. In both ways, either way you look at it. So I guess it's not really good versus evil, it's evil versus evil, and they weren't going to pony up the extra cash to try and help make this a fair fight.
Right.
So yay for Spaniards. And,
so
and the French, of course.
So the officers in the war, they got taken care of. But the rank and file soldiers, they didn't get fucking paid, and they were the ones out there dying from the shelling and sickness, all while watching the rich get richer. So on New Year's Day 1781,
bourbon baby,
Some of them had a little bit too much bourbon. Some had a little bit too much rum, and they were like, "Fuck this!" and wounded some of their officers, killed one of the captains, and then marched fully armed, including with cannon, towards Philly, where the Continental Congress was. And my favorite part of this was that these Pennsylvania troops were stationed near Morristown, New Jersey.
Nice touch. You know what we should do? We should get some Sailor Jerry and put a fucking crack in that bell with this cannon, man. I'm telling you.
So I wanted to do what I usually do and just close it out with a Zinn quote, but this is kind of long. So I know, people don't like being read to all the time, but this shit is important. These details here are super important. So fucking pay attention. George Washington handled it cautiously. Informed of these developments by General Anthony Wayne, he told Wayne not to use force. He was worried that the rebellion might spread to his own troops. He suggested Wayne get a list of the soldiers' grievances and said Congress should not flee Philadelphia because then the way would be open for the soldiers to be joined by Philadelphia citizens. He sent Knox rushing to New England on his horse to get 3 months' pay for the soldiers, while he prepared 1,000 men to march on the mutineers as a last resort. A peace was negotiated in which one half the men were discharged and other half got furloughs. Shortly after this, a smaller mutiny took place in the New Jersey line involving 200 men who defied their officers and started out for the state capital at Trenton. Now Washington was ready. 600 men who themselves had been well fed and clothed marched on the mutineers and surrounded and disarmed them. Three ringleaders who were put on trial immediately in the field. One was pardoned, and 2 were shot by firing squads made up of their own friends who wept as they pulled the triggers. It was an example, Washington said.
We'll get into Nathaniel Greene a little bit later, probably next episode, but he was right there along with Washington in creating some of the most heinous acts against your own army that could possibly be imaginable. For them to not only use a firing squad as such an inhumane method, which is easy to do when you don't have to watch it yourself. It's easy to call shots when you don't have to pull a trigger, right. Or even leave your loft overlooking your wonderful city. But the fact that they left 200 men out to dry with little to no pay to go get 3 months worth of hush money, hoping that would tidy them over, and then essentially off some of the people that put their best efforts forth to help make this country a country is just outlandish.
Yeah.
And it's nothing new, unfortunately, but it's just a little bit more erratic than usual when it comes to the case of the United States versus ourselves.
Yeah, and just want to quickly mention, I wish we had a fucking producer that was much better than myself, but I want to say one of the Carolinas, I want to say South Carolina, because it's always fucking South Carolina. They were the first one to fucking cede from the fucking Union because they wanted to keep their black slaves. They have, I think they've now passed the law saying that people on death row can choose their method of death, and firing squad is one of them. So it is possible that in 2021, an American is killed by a firing squad. And
go ahead. No, I was just going to make a joke because once again, that's what we do when things are so tense. We laugh instead of cry. But I just kind of hope that there's the Looney Tune character, the Roadrunner, painting like the gun out there, and he says, "You know what? I would like to die by firing squad, except let me do it myself." So they hand over the weapon, and then he just blows everybody in the room to smithereens. But
smithereens. Yeah, and I just this fucking whitewashed history that we learn our whole lives, and nobody ever mentions this part where Washington forces his own soldiers to turn the guns on their friends. I mean, not only are you killing your own fucking soldiers who fought and helped win this war, but now you're making their friends pull the fucking trigger on them. I mean, think of how fucking sick you have to be. But we needed to make an example of them, because God forbid they have a fucking living wage, right? Like God
it was
forbid.
said in the pages of this chapter that some people joined the war specifically and only for the camaraderie of their friends that were joining the war as well. So imagine being those people that had to pull triggers on their own, who just fought in the trenches together, to come back to Washington, the richest man in the country at said point, to say, we appreciate your efforts. Now it's time to die.
Yeah. I mean, it's a mutiny. So like, we have to kill you. Sorry. I can't, this is shit that people need to learn. So I hope they listen to this stuff and just know that, all this shit that you think, most of it isn't true, or there was some just terrible fucking evil behind it. These guys did not have the best intentions in mind when they're doing this shit.
Whitewashing's the best way to put it, and sometimes that even seems like a dull statement in comparison to what we speak about on the podcast. It's just, we wrote history the way that we wanted to tell it, and it took historians such as Zinn and other people like Sky to come out and actually give us the capabilities to educate ourselves. The problem is finding the people that want to educate themselves, and that in and of itself is another task at hand, almost as bad as trying to have to pull the trigger on your buddy during a firing squad after fighting 8 or 9 battles and turning a country into America versus governed by British monarchy.
Yeah. So, again, this is why, like,
this is why I don't sleep on Thursday nights, because I go to bed with this shit on my hand and I toss and turn, and it's like, no, Washington, no. I'll kill you, Leonard Nimoy.
Yeah, I know. I know. And it's like, just, it's hard, man, because we've all been fucking indoctrinated, and our parents have been indoctrinated, our families have been indoctrinated, our friends have been indoctrinated, and they don't want to take a hard look at the real history that actually happened, and not the whitewashed, indoctrinated history that they had, because God forbid, something not be true in their world. One thing will make their whole fucking world crumble, opposed to learning about the real shit that actually happened and making, the correlations to today, and just being like, man, that shit, it's not right. This has been happening for centuries. Something has got to fucking change. And I just can't. There's so many people who just don't fucking want to. They don't want to do the work. And
it's because it doesn't affect them. And that's problematic. And people think that it's not a problem. Things aren't a problem unless it affects you. The world isn't that bad when it comes to childhood cancer, unless your child has cancer. The world
Right.
isn't so bad when it's childhood diabetes, unless you're the one that has to pay $395 for a month's worth of insulin.
Right. And I mean, this is, again, like you said, like it's hard to go to sleep at night with shit going on. It's like, again, I do those exercises of, I still laugh at the first joke you ever made about, but the exercise of putting myself in people's shoes. And I'm, for the last couple weeks, putting myself in the shoes of a Palestinian dad who, and families who they're putting everybody in the same room. Everybody goes like it, in the parents' bedroom, so that if a rocket does come, a bomb does come, it kills all of them at once, and nobody has to survive without all the others. Or what they're doing with extended families now is they are swapping kids. So I would be giving my kids to, my sister. My sister would be giving me, her, at this point, hypothetical children, so that there would be some survivors of the family. Because if one bomb hits me, my kids are still going to survive me for a time.
And this is the shit we're talking about. And we're talking about it in 2021. The same kind of outlandish shit that happened in 1775 through 78. And this is happening on Gaza.
Yeah. And I mean, we're talking about, the lesser of evils, not condemning and actually saying like, they're just defending themselves from Hamas rockets. That's like saying like, your female friend, or I mean, it doesn't have to be a female, but let's say if a female is getting raped and, she scratches her offender, and it's like, well, she's the piece of shit because
she's charged for assault because
she's defending herself. But we're talking about, it's like, no, that's not, what do you, I just can't. It's hard for me to articulate, but put yourself in those shoes, in those family shoes, or don't, because you don't want to experience the fucking anxiety, But these are, this is what helps give you perspective and just show some fucking empathy or sympathy, in that case.
Well, to be honest with you, I disagree with that last statement, or don't. And I know you were being facetious in every phase of the word, but willful ignorance is just as bad as being a part of what is essentially apartheid. They're trying to do away with Palestinians in general.
It's
with
a
a snap of a finger.
Cleansing. Yeah.
So willful ignorance is not an excuse. I don't know so much about the conflict between Israel and Palestine, so I don't pay attention to it. So go read a couple paragraphs. It's not going to kill you. And I get it. It's not on American soil, and we have enough problems of our own. But once again, these are people.
Right. And we are supplying these arms to Israel, who are,
and lots of them. And I said 2.6 billion, and you looked at me and shrugged and said, "Nice try." And I believe the figure was 3.8.
It's 3.8. So yeah, that's that'll wrap it up for the week.
We're gonna start putting a label warning like Robert Morris did on his cigarettes that says, "Do not listen to before bed."
Surgeon General warning.
Yeah.
So yeah, this, I don't know how many parts this chapter is going to be, but
it's going to be at least 3 or 4.
At least 3. That's for sure. So, yeah, check out patreon.com/revolutionary roulette. If you want to become a patron, it's $5 a month. You get some extra stuff. I came up with a new Jerry Seinfeld bit talking about the JFK assassination. So if you want in on that, go ahead and donate the $5. Or if you want to do 99 cents, go to anchor.fm and it's a 99 cents paywall, but you'll still get all the same audio. I haven't gotten any emails yet to Revolutionary Roulette. So either we're doing really well or, nobody gives a fuck. But
I would go with the latter, but we'll get there. And like you said at the beginning of this is, if nobody listens, you have me convinced that we're doing it for ourselves, that we actually tried to be a part of the greater good. And we can show your children and my whatever, that Rob a father, Josh a devoted uncle, and whatnot, that we were actually trying to help educate people because we've made the mistakes on our own to have that and not want that to happen for other people. So
right. And if I can, change one mind and all it took was me reading this book and preparing this podcast and talking into a fucking microphone and talking to my friend about it. I mean, that's priceless.
It is.
So, like I tell you, this should push you left.
It definitely should. And we're not talking about Joe Biden left either. So
the diet Republican.
Yeah, we can get into that on maybe a Patreon episode, so you can educate some more people. But Josh has got to go to bed. Rob did a wonderful job guiding the ship. If I can steal a line from Mr. Alexander Hamilton himself, good night, you sheepskin cocktuckers.
Yeah, he said that verbatim. All right, thanks, guys.